Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hello, I'm Carol Fleck, and on behalf of the Attitude team, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's ADHD Experts presentation titled New Digital Therapeutics for ADHD in Children. Leading today's presentation is Dr. Randy Kulman. Dr. Kulman is the founder of Learning Works for Kids, an educational technology company that uses video games to teach executive function and academic skills. His latest project is called LW4K.com. It's an online tutoring program that uses games like Minecraft and Roblox to practice and improve executive functions. Dr. Kulman is the author of 3 books, including his most recent, The Gaming Overload Workbook for Teens. In today's webinar, we'll explore the role of digital therapeutics to treat children with ADHD. Medication and behavioral therapy are well-known first-line treatment options. Brain training tools, on the other hand, like virtual reality and video games, are relatively new to this field. Our expert today will share his approaches and research into these new therapies, including how effective they might be and for how long, and whether they're worth the cost. We'd like to begin today's webinar by asking this poll question to our live audience. What do you most want to know about the digital therapeutics that say they manage symptoms of ADHD? Please select your answers and comment in the text box under the video player to tell us more. You'll see the poll results when you submit your response. While you do that, I'll point out that live participants may submit questions anytime during the live event. To download the slides, click on the Event Resources section of your webinar screen. If you're interested in the Certificate of Attendance option, look for instructions in the email you'll receive about an hour after the live broadcast. A transcript of today's event will be made available in the coming week. If you're listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search Podcast 434 to access the slides, the webinar replay, the Certificate of Attendance option, and the webinar transcript. And we have great news, and it's just in time for the holiday season. Attitude Magazine is offering a 2-for-1 subscription deal now through December 31st. Visit attitudemag.com, go to the magazine tab, hold your mouse over it, and you'll see the 2-for-1 gift subscription offer. Every issue is filled with practical advice from leading experts to help adults and families with ADHD thrive. And with this 2-for-1 offer, you can subscribe for your family and share the magazine with a loved one or a teacher who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. If you support the work we're doing here at Attitude, visit attitudemag.com/subscribe. Finally, the sponsor of this webinar is Play Attention. Improve executive function and self-regulation with NASA-inspired technology. For over 25 years, Play Attention has been helping children and adults thrive and succeed. Tufts University School of Medicine found Play Attention significantly improved attention, executive function, academic performance, and behavioral control of ADHD students. Your program will include a lifetime membership and a personal executive function coach to customize your plan along the way. Home and professional programs available. Call 828-676-2240 or click the link on their screen to schedule your free one-on-one consultation. Visit www.playattention.com to learn more. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. So without further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Dr. Randy Kulman. Thank you so much for joining us today and for leading this discussion.
Thank you very much, Carol. I am thrilled to be here for Attitude Magazine and for all the participants who are here today who are interested in digital therapeutics for ADHD in children. I want to give a little bit of background to myself so people will understand why I am interested in this. I mean, if they're seeing my picture, they'll say, he doesn't exactly look like a gamer or somebody who is that involved or interested in technology. So I want to give a couple of disclaimers that I need to do. One is I'm not a gamer. A second is another disclaimer is I have an interest in many of these companies that I'm going to be presenting in some of their projects. We're doing a little bit of consulting with virtually all of them. We're doing a little bit of research with some of them, and all the different companies and different tools that I'm going to be presenting are going to be ones where I've had communication with the people who are running these companies to learn about them. There are many other new digital therapeutics that are out there for kids with ADHD and other issues as well. So I think that's important to recognize. We're at the infancy of this field, and we're going to be moving further and further along. So I became interested in this 35, 40 years ago when kids were playing Nintendos and the PlayStation 1s, for those of you who aren't familiar with the earliest technology. This is before the internet. I can recall a kid that I had met. His name happened to be Ryan. This is a 9-year-old kid, referred to me to do a psychological evaluation. That's predominantly what I do in my clinical practice for ADHD. The parents were 100% convinced this kid did not need an evaluation for ADHD. He could play video games all day long. I mean, this is a kid who could play games. He would stick with it. When he got stuck and frustrated, he would come back to it. Very much different from what was happening with him in the classroom. Ryan was one of many, and I'm sure that those of you who are parents or clinicians who work with kids with ADHD recognize this. And one of the things that we're better at understanding about ADHD today than we were 35 or 40 years ago is that virtually everybody with ADHD can pay attention. It's just what can they pay attention to? Where can they sustain their attention? And in fact, many people with ADHD, if they're paying attention to something they love, they can be great at it. Okay. And that's one of the things that I began to ask questions about is how could we use these technologies to help kids? I was particularly interested in this because I'm very interested in children's play. It goes back to my undergraduate work with Dr. David Elkind, probably the preeminent developmental psychologist in the country who writes frequently about children's play and learning. Kids learn from their play. So I began kind of exploring this. So that's really kind of the basis for this, that we really see this sense that there's something that can happen with kids who are using games and technologies and other kinds of things, and they can learn from it. The question is how, and how do we make that happen? So today, what I want to do is I want to kind of talk about a few different things that we'll get through, okay? One is to look a little bit about how are kids with ADHD actually involved with technology. I want us to learn a little bit about how screen-based technologies can help kids with ADHD. I want to analyze how some of these things are there right now and how to best use them, and then to describe some of the actual different technologies and tools that are being used. So before I get to talking about kids with ADHD, let's set the groundwork and talk a little bit about the technologies themselves. So everybody's familiar with video games. I mean, they have the earliest video games were developed in the actually 1960s, and some people may be familiar with some of the earlier games like Asteroids and Pac-Man and things like that from the 70s. So, and in fact, actually, when I talk a little bit about any of the research, I'm going to be primarily talking about research with video games because those are the ones that have been with us the most. But now there's other things as well. Oh, and by the way, unfortunately, we couldn't really share some videos for these kinds of things. So I put together a set of videos, one of them that really describes the difference between VR and AR and XR, for those of you who want to know more. And you can find those at our learningworksforkids.com website and just search under attitude. If you search under attitude, you'll see a number of things that can help you to see some of the videos and some of the other information that will support us here. So let's talk about what these are. So there's virtual reality, and that's computer-generated environment, okay, where you have images on making use of the person in their surroundings. If any of you have not tried a VR headset, the Oculus 2, which was now it's actually known as the MetaQuest 2, is incredible. I'm not big on some of these tools because they can actually make older people like me a little bit spacey and do some things to your vestibular systems. But if you use them properly, they are absolutely amazing. We also talk about augmented reality, which is sort of adding a little bit of digital information onto what we're using. The best reference here is the idea of those of you who watch football games, you'll see the yard lines that are marked for first down. They're not real. That's artificial. XR, which is really what people are talking about frequently now, is really a catch-all term for all these things. And artificial intelligence, which we're just beginning to see, is a place where systems and machines mimic human intelligence. And what they do is they can iteratively improve themselves. They can learn from the information that they've acquired. So these are kind of the terms that are out there. Most of the research still, as I said, is about video games. To a lesser degree now, we're starting to see things with virtual reality, augmented reality. All right, now let's get back to kids with ADHD so then we can think a little bit about why might some of these tools and technologies be really helpful for these kids. Okay, so the things that work best for kids with ADHD, the interventions that work are things that are motivating, they're not boring, they have intense stimulation. Kids with ADHD benefit from immediate feedback that's meaningful. And all this stuff that I'm talking about is stuff that we've looked at from the research for 30, 40 years now. Repetition and practice is important for them. The interventions themselves are fitting the child's needs in the developmental level and their skill level. And, having an opportunity to move can be helpful. Being able to fidget can be useful. So how do we use the kids' engagement, because they can be engaged with video games, to help them with things? Okay, so but these kinds of interventions are the things that help kids with ADHD. So why do we want to use video games and technology to help kids with ADHD? So first of all, a lot of video games, interestingly enough, practice some of the skills that kids with ADHD need to improve and develop. If you ever sit and watch a child who has ADHD play a video game and then ask them questions about it, you will see that these kids are not just playing shoot 'em up games where they're taking some kind of rifle or whatever and shooting at things. They're doing all kinds of strategic moves. They're planning. They're being flexible and adaptable in situations. They're sometimes having to organize things, like collect different things so that they have more health or more life or more money in the game. So these games really practice and use a variety of executive function skills. The games that kids love are games where they problem solve. And a lot of these apps are great. A lot of these games are great for that. Now, I'm going to take a little detour for a second, and I'm talking about games here. We could also think about this in a slightly different perspective. Think about the games as having a place where the kids can practice the skills. Think about, and I'll call this an app, like a calendar app, or an app that helps with note-taking, like Notability, or a calendar app. Those kinds of apps can be used, and certainly are used frequently, to support weak executive functioning skills, some of the weak skills that kids with ADHD experience. But the kids need to learn how to use them. They need to learn how to use them properly, when to use them, where to use them. And maybe most importantly, one of the things I think we're lacking when we think about this is how to develop the habits to use these things. Here's some more reasons to think about using video games, VR, XR, and tech to help kids. Kids love these tools, okay? A lot of times they're the technology experts in the home, so they really get to know them really well. They also learn to do it without having to follow directions because they just play the games, and by playing the games, they do this. One of the things I think is really important here is that games allow kids to fail without necessarily getting public feedback. So in school, if you don't do well, everybody knows it, or you're afraid everyone knows it. In a game, nobody else knows it, okay? One of the things that we noticed about using games and technology to help kids with ADHD is that they persist far more than they would in some other areas. And the other thing that I think is really important that's kind of hard to put your finger on, we talk about there being like a dopamine rush for kids when they play video games, kids with ADHD when they play video games. In fact, there's some data that suggests that if you give kids methylphenidate, it can help reduce how much they play video games because it kind of substitutes the dopamine. But in a more general way, I think that one of the reasons that kids love these technologies is because they love paying attention. They love being focused. They like the feeling of that, and that they experience that when they're playing games and technology. All right. So now I want to ask, well, what do we know about kids and video games and ADHD? What do we know about those kinds of things? Okay. So how much do they play, for example? Well, if you ask almost any parent or clinician or just observe them sometimes, you'd say they play too much. And really, probably up until, I would say, just maybe the last 5 or 6 years, most of the research didn't suggest that kids with ADHD were playing more than their peers. But the data does tell us now that that's not really the case. And usually what we're seeing is that there are small groups of kids who play too much. And those kids can hyperfocus on the games. Those are the kids who are more prone towards addiction. Now, the reality is that when we talk about addiction in people with ADHD, for example, there's a 2 to 3 times higher rate of addiction for alcohol for people with ADHD than non-ADHD. So there are more tendencies towards addiction. So those are real things, okay? One of the things that we found in some of the research is that kids with ADHD have a much more difficult time stopping playing video games than they do the neurotypical peers. So, these are the kinds of things that we really want to take a look at. They're concerns, but they're concerns for a small group of kids with ADHD, but nonetheless, real concerns. And so we know that these problematic behaviors are there. We know that the more kids with ADHD play with video games, the more likely to show signs of inattention. So, for example, there was a good study done probably about 10 years ago that suggested that up to about an hour didn't matter. If we went beyond that for kids with ADHD, we saw more signs of inattention. And that actually fits with the general data when we think about using games and technology and its impact upon just vast populations of kids, neurotypical kids. What we found in some great studies done over in Great Britain has been that if you spend about an hour a day playing video games, it's probably good. Those kids are healthy psychologically. They do well in school. They do much better than their peers who are spending 3 hours a day or more doing that. What's fascinating about the research is that those same kids tend to do better on those same measures, the kids who are playing an hour a day, than their peers who don't play at all. Now, what's the logic to that? I mean, the logic, the way it was explained in the study, is that the kids who are playing an hour a day, first of all, there's some benefits to playing video games. There's been a bunch of recent articles, and some of you may have seen in the popular press about how video games can improve IQ scores and can improve intelligence in other ways. Sure, a little, to some degree, that's probably true. But another part of it is, I think that's really important, is that the kids who are playing an hour a day have something to share with their peers. Most of the kids who are playing video games are not playing by themselves. They're playing with their peers. Preferably, they're playing, by the way, with their peers from school that they see on a regular basis. So if you have some issues about that with your own children playing video games, one of the things I always encourage parents to do is have them play games, but make sure they're playing games with kids that they actually know, that are not just online friends, but real world friends. So what we're seeing is about an hour a day, may be actually helpful, but anything more than that from kids with ADHD, we've seen some problems with that. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the research on positive aspects, and there's a lot of research that suggests some positive aspects to playing with video games. In addition to some of the stuff you're seeing here about things like improving processing speed, we've seen stuff where it can improve reading fluency. Certain kinds of jobs, if you don't play video games, you're probably not going to be good at it. If you're a laparoscopic surgeon and you're not very good at video games, you may struggle. They actually did a study in Texas, I want to say maybe 5-6 years ago, where they compared medical students with high school juniors on some laparoscopic surgery techniques, not actually doing something with the person, but using the machinery. The 11th graders were established video game players. The medical students were not. The 11th graders were way better at doing these kinds of things than were the medical students. So there's a lot of places that we can see that. I'm particularly interested in the research that links playing video games with improving executive functioning skills. Now, one of the things I will say to you before we go too much further is that playing these games alone is going to give us very mild, modest improvements in these areas. Okay, alone, without using some other tools and technologies or some of the neurotechnologies that have distilled what we know, we see modest improvements. One of the things that makes the neurotechnologies, as we get into this a little bit different, is that they've been able to distill some of the things that we've learned from these broader video games and sort of made the intervention more directed to the kids and to the kids' needs. Okay, so we talked a little bit here about what do we know about video games and ADHD in terms of the research. Okay, now what do we know about some of the newer technologies, AR, VR, and XR? So most of the research that has taken place thus far has been primarily around assessment. So there's been very few studies up until recently that have really looked at how are VR and XR serving as tools to help with the treatment for ADHD. But as an assessment tool, it's really kind of cool. So as somebody who does assessments on a regular basis, excuse me one second, I know that my tools that I use, like continuous performance tests, tests from the NEPSI, the auditory attention test and responsive subtest, we're only capturing certain kinds of things from the kids. And some of it involves sort of a observation and hand scoring. Whereas when you're using VR to assess kids with ADHD, you're picking up on everything. You're picking up on their eye movement. You're seeing how quickly they actually respond. You're seeing what they do when there are transitions. You're seeing how much they're actually looking or paying attention to distractors. I have a lot of kids who can actually do pretty well on the tests that I have administered them. They don't seem to be paying attention. They don't seem to be looking at things, but they have such good auditory tools where they can actually kind of pay attention without really paying attention. Whereas when we're using VR to assess kids, we can get a more accurate view of it. Now, we also can look at some of the tools as treatment tools. Okay, so as I was saying to you before, most of the information is about assessment. There was a 2022 review just recently. They went through 300 articles looking at VR tools in the world in terms of treatment for kids with ADHD and other psychological disorders. Only about 30 of them were looking at actual treatment rather than assessment. At the end of the day, when they reviewed all of the tools, they said that they see them as being promising tools for the management of ADHD. And it suggests that using them properly, they can help patients to learn life skills and other helpful behaviors. So, the thing about it is that VR can make for very realistic environments. So you can actually have kids practice a skill in something that mimics their real world environment. That's one of the issues that we have with video games, because the video games are games themselves, but they're not really mimicking the real world. And so the generalization going from the game to the real world is a little bit more difficult. But VR offers that as a possibility. Okay, so we've thrown around a number of terms, and now I'm going to introduce a few more to you. Okay, digital therapeutics, digital medicine, neurotechnology. So there's a number of different ways to look at this. Okay, so one of the things I would say to you is that the digital therapeutics, when we talk about that, digital therapeutics are medical interventions that are evidence-based, they're prescriptive. A lot of the folks who are involved in this are seeking government approval in the U.S. FDA approval. So, and that makes it for very rigorous standards. Okay, the companies and tools that we're looking at here are, first of all, they're well researched. They're usually very targeted. They're usually kind of targeting a very specific thing as opposed to broadly saying we're treating ADHD. They're treating something very specific, okay? And like I said, the research is really quite good with these, okay? There are lots of other kinds of things that we can use for digital health, that just collecting information is going to be important. There are a number of apps and games out there. For example, one of the tools that many people who are here might even be using is an app called Calm that's used for helping people to relax and meditation. They now have a new part to it that I've had a number of my patients present to me that they're using called Sleep Stories, helping them fall asleep. So we have these kind of digital apps that are helping people with anxiety, depression, and many other kinds of things as well. So what are the main characteristics that we see when we're looking at this? Okay. So first of all, as I said, they're really usually evidence-based. They're doing a lot of research. Okay. One of the things that makes video game-based digital therapeutics and digital medicine different from regular medicine is that they're algorithms rather than molecules. And what that really means is that if you develop a medicine, which can take many, many years to develop, it's based upon certain molecules and not easily adaptable. Whereas the algorithms that are being used in digital-based therapeutics are very adaptable. And in fact, most of them are designed to work directly with the child. Some of them that have what we would call more closed loop techniques, where they're kind of evaluating where the kid is at and making almost moment by moment feedback about what to do and how to introduce the next levels of challenges or how to reduce the challenges. So that the algorithms are kind of being used there, and the algorithms can be adapted and changed. And so making progress with these tools is going to be much easier than having, say, for example, introducing a new medicine. And the other thing that really has impressed me, and as I said to you, I've spoken to all the different tools and technologies and companies that I'm talking about today are people that I've talked to and had conversations with, and there are many other ones. But the thing that struck me most at this point is that everyone is saying we have this sort of really clear intervention. It's a tool in the toolbox. No one is saying to me or to anybody else at this point that I can see that this is the cure for ADHD. And I think that's one of the differences that we're seeing right now that's going to be quite different. And especially if they're looking for FDA approval, that they really need to be able to say, this is what we're targeting. It's very clearly targeted. There's sort of a, how do I say this? There's kind of a skeptical approach to some of these tools and techniques, in part, I think, because of some of the brain training technologies that have been out there in the past that probably oversold themselves and kind of made it so that they got to make you younger. Well, they help a little bit and they help with some specific things. And there's been a lot of kind of research to suggest that these tools weren't quite what they sold themselves to be. All right. So let's start talking about some of these tools and technologies. So let's start with Mightier. So Mightier is a series of video games, and it's designed to help kids build their emotional regulation skills. Okay, and Mightier and some of the other companies as well here. One of the things that I really respected is that they have started with video game makers, developers. Okay, they didn't start saying, okay, we're going to do something and then we'll find some kind of boring video game to help make this happen. They said, we need to make the game interesting and engaging and fun. Keep in mind that they want kids to play these things. In order to get better at anything, you need to put in time, effort, you need to be motivated, you need to be persistent. By definition, we want them to be attentive because we want them to really be focused on what they're doing. And so the games have to be interesting. The competition for these neurotechnology companies is quite high. The bar is high. I mean, playing a game like Fortnite or Pokemon or Animal Crossing, those are really exciting games for kids to play. So these games have to be good. So Mightier, as some of the other companies, they started off with folks who were game developers. And so what they use is they use an armband to measure heart rate, and the heart rate controls breathing and therefore controls the game and the progress you can make in the game. So they're targeting emotional regulation, the capacity to handle frustration and stress. So, and you can see a little bit of how it works. The wireless heart rate, they get feedback directly as to how they're doing. They get instruction about how to calm themselves within the game. So this was interesting. So this is one of the tools that we've done a little bit of research in our office. And what we found in talking to parents and the kids is that they really saw some improvements in anger and frustration. The kids told us they were able to start to tell themselves to calm down, to know when to use deep breathing. Most of them found their breathing exercise to be helpful. And oftentimes now they're doing it on their own. The one thing that I think was a little bit of a struggle for some of the families is finding a routine for this, finding a regular way to do this. Some of the kids lost a little bit of interest over time. And one of the things that Mighty is doing is they're addressing that by making new and more exciting and interesting video games. So, and that's certainly part of what happens to kids with video games in general. And so, and it's really been something that the kids have liked. I accidentally found out about it with one of my patients once. I hadn't even recommended this to them, and they came back to me and told me they started using it, and they were really thrilled with it. And their child had been referred to me because of emotional regulation issues. So it was really cool to see. So another one is Play Attention. Okay, Play Attention is a little bit different. This is a more computer-based program that integrates feedback technology. It's kind of a neurofeedback of sorts. And again, it uses an armband. And the armband controls what's on the screen, and the person gets to feedback to know whether they're paying attention or whether they're not paying attention. Okay, so the goal of it is to support learning to direct their attention and to sustain their attention to the task. So what happens is here that's interesting. It's less of a video game that's engaging and interesting in that respect, and it's more of a feedback loop that helps the players. And the players, by the way, in this case, can be both kids and adults. And it helps them to get that kind of feedback. One of the things that Play Attention wants to do, more so than kind of keeping a kid focused on something that's engaging, is they want to actually teach people to pay attention to low stimulus activities. So, for example, paying attention to a teacher, how to know how to do that, how to return from kind of getting distracted to paying attention. So it works on that. This tells us a little bit about how it actually works. As I said, the people who are using it are getting direct feedback about how much are they paying attention. And they, again, target some specific skills. Time on task, okay? Attention stamina, how long can you sustain your attention? Short-term memory. So typically people are using this about 1 hour per week. XR Health. So XR Health combines virtual reality and having a clinician. Okay, and by the way, Play Attention also involves a clinician as well. So they involve like an executive function coach. And XR Health uses outside clinicians to help determine which types of their tools they can do. The people at XR Health are all over virtual reality. And when I've spoken to them, it's like they are so excited about the possibilities of virtual reality as a form of treatment. Most of their work right now focuses on anxiety issues, more so than ADHD, but they do have an ADHD program that's essentially like a boxing program where you're boxing and trying to make sure you avoid certain things and hit certain things. So it's a little bit of exercise, if you will. So it's really fascinating because they're so into the VR. Deepwell is actually a fascinating company as well. The folks there, the two founders are, one of them was a big-time game developer. Another one was someone who's developed a variety of medical devices. And essentially what they're doing at Deepwell is they're banking on game mechanics of video games, that they can build video games that really focus certain game mechanics to help with thinking skills and help with problem solving. They also see this as really having a direct impact upon vagus nerve stimulation. So they're very much kind of the video game folks. They have an enormous advisory board of people who are involved in all types of brain training. Right now, again, most of the stuff that they're targeting are anxiety, depression, stress-related kinds of things. But their fascination with video games and the technology itself is going to be really interesting to thing with it, see where they go. They have some fascinating games that I've taken a look at as well. So this is the work that I do, which is a totally different take on this. Okay, our take is that video games allow kids, or in that matter, adults, to use a variety of executive functioning skills. And while they use all these skills in the game, the question becomes, how effectively can you take those skills from the game to the real world? Well, the data would suggest you can do a little bit of that. What we try to do at Learning Works for Kids is we try to go beyond that, and we try to use the games and technologies as a tool for teaching. And the way we do that is we help the kids to identify the skills they're using in the game, to then consider how those skills help them in the game and help them in the real world, and then finally, how to apply them in other settings. And I want to go back to that for a second. And what we basically have a little ditty that we call it. We call it detect, reflect, connect. And so by identifying the skills, recognizing the skills, and then giving exercise to actually apply them in the real world, we see the games as being a tool for teaching these skills. And what we do is, rather than make our own games, which is really demanding to do really good games, is we just use the games that kids love. So we catch the kids where they're at. So and the way we do this with live classes where we have live instructors, and then we have series of self-guided classes where the kids can actually watch really cool videos that we've made that give them projects to do, teaching them about how they're using the skill in the game, and then have them essentially do a series of projects, and then they have to do a project outside of the game that actually applies the skill. And for that, they earn rewards and other kinds of things like that. Next one is June. So June is a little bit of a different sort of thing. June is essentially an app. It was originally developed to help parents assist their kids in getting their chores done. And what they do is they have a June game. So there's two different things. The parents fill out something that says, here are the tasks and things that I want my kid to do. And my child's going to earn some rewards for completing those tasks. And those rewards are going to help them in the June game itself, where they earn coins and experience points through this by doing things. So they go through this game. It's kind of it's a fun game that the kids enjoy playing. They collect new characters. They do other kinds of things. And so what was interesting about June is when the founders developed it, they were thinking, well, this is something that most parents are going to really like to do, because this will be a good way to get the kids to do some of these chores, because they get to play this game and they're sort of earning some of their health points and other things that allow them to excel in the game. Well, what they found is that their super users were parents of kids with ADHD. So they started to focus this a little bit more on ADHD and looking at how could they kind of model this so that specific executive function issues like task initiation and task persistence could be utilized in the game. So it's kind of a cool tool for parents to use. Now, one of the things they kind of anecdotally told me is that a lot of parents are telling them that they had a lot less nagging with their kids now. They're playing June. So and in our office, we just started doing a little bit of research with June. Essentially, we've only gotten to the first point, which is just kind of the onboarding piece of it. How easy is it for parents to do this and get the kids going? And so far, everything sounds really good. Like, the parents find it to be easy to do, and the kids are involved and engaged and interested. EndeavorRx. So EndeavorRx is probably, if you've heard anything about video games and ADHD in the past year or two, you've probably heard about EndeavorRx. So EndeavorRx, again, developed by gamers. Okay, the EndeavorRx kind of came out of some work done by Adam Gazzaley, who's a psychologist, developed a game called NeuroRacer, and I think it was out in 2013. And at that time, it was actually designed for adults. They found that for older adults, it improved their multitasking capacities and their abilities of cognitive control. I think there was some data that suggested that it could have actually helped with a little bit of the speed of processing as well. And so they took the principles there and then kind of began hiring game developers to make this an interesting and really enjoyable game. And again, I would encourage you to go to our learningworksforkids.com website and go to Attitude, search for Attitude, because you can watch the video. The video of EndeavorRx really gives you a great feel what the game's like. It's exciting. It's fun. I mean, we had a number of our graduate students and undergraduates playing it. They really loved it. They found that it was really enticing. They said the graphics were really cool. Now these are all older kids. They questioned how long they would be interested in playing it, but the game right now is made for kids for 8 to 12 years old. This is all 20 and 25-year-olds. So, but they love the graphics, and what's happening now with EndeavorRx is they're kind of building, they're building out the game, and it changes for each kid. And it works through this proprietary platform that they call SSME, that engages cognitive networks. So by playing this game, and what you're needing to do is you're needing to avoid certain things, you're needing to select targets. As you go through the game, it's very demanding. You have to multitask. And the challenges adapt to the child. This can only be used by one particular child, because if the child is struggling, it'll make it a little bit easier. If the child is doing well, it's going to add more challenges to it. One of the ways that it actually works is by getting to the point where the child experiences the challenges to the point where they're almost at the point of frustration, and then it backs off a little bit. But that's sort of like, it's like exercise, no pain, no gain. And so it works like that to help kids to do this. Now, one of the things that makes EndeavorRx kind of really unique at this point is the research. And like I said, a number of other companies are in the same process of looking at this. I've talked to a company called Calmsy, which is doing some stuff on anxiety, and they're doing some really good research. But EndeavorRx has done some great research. They've done a couple of different studies to look at the effectiveness of it. So one of the studies was a randomly controlled trial in which there were 180 kids in the experimental group, 168 in the control group. The control group was actually doing something that was kind of fun and engaging. It was a video game. It was a word game. So they determined that this game was actually very engaging. So kids wanted to pay attention and play with it. What they found out is after 4 weeks, the kids in the experimental group did much better on some neuropsychological testing. They used the TOVA and a number of parent-rated ADHD improvement scales. And then they did a second study. This study was just kids doing EndeavorRx. Some of the kids were taking medication. Some of the kids were not taking medication. In this study, again, significant improvements were seen across a variety of parent rating scales. And what happened in this study is they did 4 weeks on, then they took a 4-week pause. We saw that the kids did not lose their gains, and then a second 4-week treatment phase. And during that second 4-week treatment phase, the kids made even more improvements. So, this is really one of the places where we're really starting to see the research support what we're seeing in other areas. So, those are some of the companies and some of the tools that we're looking at. If you want to look at some other places to find out information about this, I would encourage you to look at some of these places here. One area that if you really want to learn a little bit more about what's going on in the area of digital therapeutics or digital medicine is the Digital Therapeutics Alliance. And they're on top of all kinds of things, not just kids with ADHD and not just mental health issues, but all kinds of things, because this is happening not just in our field here. It's happening across many fields. It's happening certainly in even kind of medication compliance, and where we're starting to see that we're using digital technologies and tools to help people in a way, and seeing it as being a very useful tool. I mean, keep in mind that these digital tools are with us every place. For example, this is actually highly unusual. I am looking for my cell phone. It's not on my desk, but 75% of people have their cell phone within arm's reach at all times. So these digital media and technologies are here with us. They're going to stay. The question I have is, how do we make best use of them? And I'm sure I'm going to have some questions in a little bit about what do we do about those kids where we can't get them away from those technologies. And that is the legitimate concern. And there are a lot of strategies that I think we can use for that as well. As I had mentioned earlier, I've written a few books. My Playing Smarter in a Digital World book is really more about using digital media and technology to help kids develop executive function skills. And my last book that Carol had mentioned, which I appreciate, is really sort of flipping that over and looking at talking directly to teenagers and saying, hey, you know what? Your technology is fine. It's part of your world. But how do you balance it with other parts of your life? Because one of the things that teens don't do very well is they get very involved. One of the things I actually found to be helpful, many of the suggestions in here came from the teenagers that I work with. One of the things I find to actually be helpful in talking to teens about all this kind of stuff is to get them to be a little bit cynical, not just towards you as a parent or as an adult, but towards big technology companies. And get them to say, ask them the question, why do you think that Netflix shows you a show in 5 seconds? Or what do you think Amazon wants from you? And they all know. They want us to stay on the screen using this, and they all know it's so they can make money. And once you get them to sort of accept that, you can start having discussions with teenagers. Teenagers know a lot about what's going on. And sometimes actually they watch their parents spend too much time with their technologies as well. So that's it. There are some of the ways that you can get a hold of me and some of the places that we're at. I do write for Psychology Today. I frequently write about these issues there as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kulman. Before we start the Q&A, I'd like to thank Play Attention once more for sponsoring this webinar. I'd also like to share the final poll results. Here's what you said. 25% asked what research has been done. 22% asked, how do we know if these digital therapies are working? 19% asked, do digital therapeutics work equally well for kids with hyperactive ADHD and inattentive ADHD? 14% asked, for which age range are these most appropriate? So let's start the Q&A. So naturally, we had quite a few questions around how long do the effects of these games last in the real world and at school, and how often do you have to play to see these lasting effects? I know you addressed this. If you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So thus far, the data is a little bit limited. As I said, we're really in the infancy. This is at the bottom of the first inning, as I like to say as well. We're just beginning to see, what's going on and how long these kinds of effects last. The best research is the research that the folks at EndeavorRx has done. That's suggesting that it's lasting for a while. That they're seeing effects after kids have stopped it and continuing it. But because these technologies are so new, we can't look and see is it helping 2 or 3 years down the road at this point. We really don't have any great data on that. Okay, I wish I could tell you that we did, but we don't.
So, how would caregivers and parents know if it's working for their children?
Sure, that's an excellent question. I think, and that's one of the questions that I think each and every one of these technologies is asking themselves: is how do they know? So I think that one of the ways that they can know is that they can observe their kid using some of the technologies in a way where they're really focused on it and they're enjoying it, and then they're actually applying it. They're doing a little bit better in school. They can see them increasing the amount of focus and attention that they have. I had mentioned some of the anecdotal information that comes from the folks at Mightier, where they're actually observing the kids, say, calm down, some of the things that they're learning directly from their technologies. What we're hoping to see, and I think that I think some of these different neurotechnologies are trying to look at is, are we seeing direct impacts upon the kids' performance in school? Are we seeing them be able to sit and focus longer to kind of get their homework done more? Those are the kinds of things that we want to see. I also think that if we can start to see, are they starting to step back and use some executive skills in the real world? That will be an important part to take a look at as well. There's some data that we can see in terms of doing some direct neuropsychological testing afterwards, but sometimes that's not always as closely connected to the real world as we would like it to.
Okay. Do these digital therapeutics work equally well for kids with hyperactive ADHD and inattentive ADHD, like we asked in the poll question? And also, do they work equally well between girls and boys?
Interesting. I don't have any data about girls and boys. I'd be really interested to know if there's any data about that. We do know that boys tend to play video games a little bit more than girls. But so I don't know about that. In terms of the hyperactive, so the one piece of, again, data that I'm having. So I'm trying to respond to you, Carol, with what do we know in the research right now? And again, this is new stuff. This is new stuff. So the best data that we have is that the people who have used EndeavorRx have stated that it can be helpful in a population of kids with inattentive type and combined type. They did not have any data saying it's good for primarily impulsive, hyperactive impulsive type. So my inclination is it really varies with the kinds of interventions, because and maybe I really should have said this at the beginning. I think we really need to look at each of these different tools and technologies and all the new ones that will be coming out as well, is to seeing what are they targeting. Okay. So for example, if something is targeting, say, skills such as task initiation or task persistence, that's what we want to see. Is it really helping with that particular skill? So a lot of it really has to do with the particular skills and the things that they're targeting. That's not the same for each and every one. Just because something's called a neurotechnology and it uses VR or video games, it doesn't mean that it's really targeting, ADHD in general. As I said, one of the things that I have a lot of respect for in the people who are working in this field right now is they're trying to be very clear and targeted. And that fits with some of the general guidelines, I think, for developing these technologies. There's an interesting set of articles written at a place called, and I'm going to have to get rid of my Rhode Island accent, called Sharp Brains, and that's SHARP brains.com. And they've done some interesting kind of descriptions of how do you set up the parameters for determining if a technology can be very helpful. And one of the things they talk very clearly about, it needs to target a specific brain function. So I think that when we look at this from that perspective, I think that we can kind of say, well, is this tool targeting hyperactivity? Well, if it's not, it's probably not going to be helpful. I'm not aware so much of tools targeting hyperactivity, although one might think that difficulties with regulating emotions go along with difficulties in regulating behavior. So maybe some of the tools like Mightier that are targeting kids' emotional regulation issues might have a little bit of impact upon kind of kids not behaving impulsively. But I don't have any data on that.
Right. So we've had quite a few questions around, will these technologies work for younger and older teens? Because some of the games that you had recommended were for between 8 and 12. Mm-hmm. So will this work for younger and older teens? And we actually had questions around, could this be helpful for adults as well?
So play attention is for adults. So we can start with that. Most of the other ones are really more focused on younger kids. I am sure that many of these companies are looking at this, and in their pipelines, they're thinking about how can they do stuff for older kids. But again, they've been very targeted. They're not trying to say it helps with a teenager with these kinds of things. When I look at teens, and if I can go off track for a second here, I think that one of the things that we want to do is we want to teach teenagers how to use those technologies, those apps, as I was describing, things like a Google Calendar or Notability, or one of my big things is teaching them how to dictate things. So many of these teenagers who have ADHD hate to write, can't get anything down on paper. We need to teach them how to use these things. And when I say teach them how to use these things, I don't mean simply say, here, use this technology. It doesn't work like that. How do you actually use it? How do you use it effectively? When do you use it? What are some of the kind of techniques you can do to kind of make this helpful? And more importantly, how do you make it a habit? How do you generalize this stuff? The biggest issue that I think we're going to see with all this stuff, and I think this is really underlying some of these questions, which is, how do we get this stuff to generalize? How do we get, so one of the questions earlier was, well, how long are the effects? If I can reinterpret that, it's like, I could say, well, how well does it transfer to other activities and to sustain those activities? And that's going to be one of the next steps that I think a lot of these companies need to do, is to think about, how do you do this and help with the generalization? That might be combining with another technology. That might be building in generalization principles into their technologies. That might be helping get to what we would call a closer or a near transfer rather than a far transfer. Far transfer is like the idea of, driving a car and then driving an airplane. That's a big distance. But near transfer, driving a car to driving a truck, not so hard. How do we get closer to that? And certainly VR and XR is going to allow us some opportunities for that as well. And that will, I think, help us to see that not only will they be able to learn it in the technology, but learn it in other places as well.
Dr. Kulman, we had quite a few questions around insurance. Are these therapies covered? Do you need a doctor or a therapist referral to have a better chance of getting this covered? Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure. So at this point, of the ones that I presented today, two of them talk about using health insurance. That's in EndeavorRx. And so EndeavorRx, they're working with insurance companies to get it covered. It depends on the insurance company. And the other one is XR Health, because they're using therapists, and depending upon, again, someone's health insurance, part of it may be covered as well. The other ones, I'm just kind of glancing through my stuff today. I want to make sure I'm not skipping any. I don't believe that any of the other ones are eligible for health insurance. It may well be that some of the companies are looking into that themselves, but I'm not aware of that.
Okay. So we have a few questions around neurofeedback and how these digital therapeutics compare with neurofeedback therapy.
So, I'm not an expert with neurofeedback per se. That I think that some of what is being used in play attention is similar to what is done in neurofeedback, but at using other kinds of technologies in addition to that. Neurofeedback does a very good job, I think, at helping people to learn some focusing skills. And again, one of the questions becomes, how well does neurofeedback generalize to the real world? How well can you take what you learn in neurofeedback and then go apply it in your day-to-day routine and doing your homework and being engaged in a conversation or wherever you need to be focused and pay attention. So one of the things that I think makes these tools different from neurofeedback is that it's far more engaging. And that engagement piece, that attention, I talk about with kids with video games, I call it engagement. Kids, when you see kids engaged, they are really focused. They experience that sense of flow. They're right there and more persistent. I mean, if you want to learn something, pay great attention to it. Get very involved. Be very focused. If you're very focused, you're going to learn something better. So, in my sense, this is kind of the next step beyond neurofeedback in terms of using some of those technologies where we've made it really engaging and interesting. And that's going to be one of the keys that makes this stuff work.
Are there certain profiles of kids with ADHD, perhaps other comorbidities such as ODD, where digital tech therapy may be helpful or less helpful?
That's an interesting question. Let me think about that. My inclination would be to say that many of these technologies are going to be ultimately better at skill building and skill development, as well as working on improving certain brain functioning that will be helpful for kind of focusing and paying attention. So that makes me really feel as if the kids who are maybe less impulsive, less acting out kids may not benefit as much, that they may benefit more from more conventional, traditional behavior management kinds of programs. That would be sort of my take on that.
Right. Well, unfortunately, that has to be the last question because we're almost out of time. But thank you so much, Dr. Kulman, for joining us today and sharing your expertise with our ADHD community. I'd also like to share that Dr. Kulman wrote a user's guide to digital therapies in the winter issue of Attitude magazine. It's on the cover. So thank you for that. If you're listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 434 to access the slides, the webinar replay, the certificate of attendance option, and the webinar transcript. Thank you so much.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.